Isis, you didn't do what you were supposed to do. 1 second. Nope. It literally doesn't look like it's recording, like I know it is. Hello, my name is Isis and this is IsisSaysHi. I like to make a lot of research videos about topics that matter to me, and sometimes I vlog. Okay, not matter, but things that interest me, that are like on my noggin. First things first, I have this. I bought a mic because I felt like it gave off the vibe that I wanted to give, right? Secondly, I got 2 new piercings. Actually, no, I got 5. The piercer was a little worried about me, but I got 5 piercings in one night. I got a nose piercing as well. So those are the things. Those are the cool things. I feel like a baddie. I want to let you know that. I'm excited about it. I love it. 10 out of 10 would recommend if you're not afraid of needles. Go to a piercing shop because they're cleaner and they won't shatter your eardrum. Or is it like the ear thingies, the cartilage, I think it is. It won't shatter that. It's safer, way cleaner. The piercer was a little worried, didn't understand, asked if I was going through a crisis, didn't understand that I am in fact a Virgo, definitely was already planning to get these things and just wanted to get them all done in one go. I did not think about the price or the fact that getting 5 in one day is probably a little wild until I wrote it out on the paper that they have you sign. So that was fun. Those are the updates for me, if you cared. I don't know. We're gonna get into the actual video. So I did talk about how I wanted to talk a little bit more about psychology stuff because I really do love doing psychology stuff and talking about it. It's one of my favorite things. It helps that I was a psych major. My bachelor's is in psychology and my master's is in social work. So I love psychology stuff so much. I have a greater appreciation for it now that I'm not being graded on it every 5 seconds. So 10 out of 10. So last research video I talked about the bystander effect, and now I'm going to talk about Phineas Gage because it was one of the stories that kind of kept coming up when I was looking up a lot of stuff about Kenny Genovese's murder. I learned that there's like a lot of like false things about Phineas Gage's story that I didn't know about because I was taught it very differently when I was in college and had behavioral neuroscience, which was one of my favorite classes ever. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. Which is one of my favorite classes ever. And I decided to film at 7 in the morning. I didn't think it was going to be this noisy, but I should have known better. Let's get into the story about Phineas Gage now that I think I've babbled enough. Phineas Gage was a railroad worker in the United States, and he had survived a traumatic brain injury that was caused by the iron rod that pierced his skull and damaged a good chunk of his left frontal lobe and his eye as well, which I think is the most common thing that people know about Phineas Gage. His case was pretty much the first one to suggest a link between brain trauma and personality change just because of the change in personality for him, and he became one of the most famous patients in neuroscience. I learned about him when I was in college, so yes, that is correct. This was significant in the mid-19th century because a lot of the brain and how the brain functions was pretty unknown. Phrenologists are people who I believe either study skulls or just like the head. We're still assessing people's personalities by measuring bumps on their skulls at the time. They were also kind of racist. Gage's accident would aid in the development of neuroscience research as a discipline. It's kind of a pretty cool discipline, not gonna lie. I had one of the best teachers. If you're watching this, shout out to you. Scientists now have a better understanding of the role of the frontal cortex in higher order functions, including reasoning, language, and social cognition. The prefrontal cortex is particularly crucial for impulse control and planning. Scientists still don't have a huge understanding of how the prefrontal lobes work, about how most of the brain works, and a lot of prefrontal injury individuals can pass a lot of neurological tests, but where the real ability to see like that brain injury is more of if you actually know the person before and after the injury. The person was like pretty ambitious, made a lot of great decisions, was a great planner, but after the injury maybe was not very ambitious, had maybe a lack of like foresight and planning ahead and empathy and other kind of things that you can't really measure using like a neurological test, but you can measure by listening to the people who actually know them and are around them. And that's not to say that people's life experiences and opinions cannot be valuable. It's just in these kinds of cases, it isn't helpful to measure somebody's actual brain activity and injury if you're kind of going based off of other people's opinions of them. Phineas was born sometime in July in 1823 in New Hampshire. Gotta love the mid-19th century, 1800s era. I don't know how that works anymore. I still don't know. I don't think people kept into account like people's birthdays until like the 20th century. So gotta love that for people who are trying to be better historians and align things. Anyways, he was born into a farming family and was raised on a family farm in New Hampshire, and at some point he began working on railway construction and came under the supervision of contractors who were employed by Rutland and Burlington Railroad Company. Gage's responsibilities included clearing rocks to level land, and pretty much what that all is he drilled a hole deep into a rock, placed an explosive in there, and after that the hole was filled with gunpowder and a fuse was lit. With the explosive, sand, gunpowder, you light it blows up, but like at a safe distance. That's not really what happened in Phineas Gage's case for once, and he was pretty much one of like the best people for this job. Like, he had a lot of contracts, he was doing pretty well at his job. It just so happened that in this one situation everything went wrong. My heart is beating out of my chest, which I don't think is a good thing, but we move. This feels so much more casual and chill. I love that. Gage's team had been hired again by Rutland and Burlington Road to remove some black rock near Cavendish, Vermont. And again, he was considered to be the best in the area, and he was about 25 when this accident happened. So he tamped down the powder on the afternoon of September 13th, 1848. That's my brother's birthday, September 13th. He wasn't born in 1848. Gage's crewmen reportedly had distracted him or were distracted while they were placing some rock onto a wagon. And what happened then varies depending on who you ask, and I'm assuming it's because they didn't want to get in trouble. According to one account, Gage was doing like the process that usually does, tamping down the gunpowder while still turning his head, so he didn't like make sure that there was actually sand before he put the gunpowder in. The thing of course exploded, or at least like when he was tamping it down, there was like a spark that kind of happened. And again, because there wasn't like a layer of sand before the gunpowder exploded, the thing goes through his head. Another claim is that Gage's assistant, who was also probably distracted, forgot to pour the sand in, and when Gage had, turned back around and focused, he banged the rod down really firmly, and of course the spark happened and explosive. Regardless, you need to like light a match or something to explode it, and a spark had occurred. It ignited the gunpowder somewhere in the dark, in that little hole. The tamping iron launched upward, and the rod shot completely through Gage's head and landed about 82 feet behind him, just below his left cheekbone, and exited from the top of his skull. Sounds terrifying and painful. The rod's momentum, of course, threw him backward. He landed really hard, but he literally never lost consciousness, which is like, I feel like my worst nightmare. And he twitched a few times on the ground and was talking and walking again within minutes. Again, my worst nightmare. I do not want to feel that going through my head. Are you kidding me? And then he felt steady enough to climb into an ox cart, and he sat upright for the entire mile-long trip into Cavendish. So he was outside of it, and now he went in it. And at the hotel, where I guess he was staying, he settled into a chair on the porch and was talking to people who were passing him by. And then the first doctor to arrive could see, even from his carriage, the injury, and Gage greeted the doctor by angling his head and deadpanning, "Here's business enough for you." Gotta love it. And he was pretty much blinded in his left eye. He was still conscious later that evening and was able to say the names of his co-workers, and he even suggested that he didn't wish to see his friends because he thought he was going to be back to work in a day or two, which, like, LOL, because you literally just got a chunk of your brain taken out. Are you kidding me? But also, same. I literally would do the same thing. Love capitalism. After developing an infection, Gage then spent September 23rd to October 3rd. So I would say that's a couple days. Probably about a weekish, maybe? A weekish and some days. Gage then spent September 23rd to October 3rd in a semi-comatose state. On October 7th, he He took his first steps out of bed, and by October 11th, his intellectual functioning began to improve. So Gage's survival in and of itself would have ensured him some celebrity, but his name was etched into history by observations made by John Martin Harlow, who was the doctor that treated him for a few months afterward. John Harlow was a self-described obscure country physician who was the second doctor to have seen Gage on the day of the accident. He was arriving around 6 p.m. He watched Gage lumber upstairs to his hotel room and lie down on the bed, which pretty much ruined the linens because he was still bleeding. Is he not in pain? I'm so that's nuts. In the months that followed, Gage returned to his parents' home in New Hampshire to recuperate. When Harlow saw Gage again the following year, the doctor noted that while Gage had lost his vision in his eye and was left with obvious scars from the accident, he was in good physical health and appeared recovered. Harlow noted that Gage knew how much time had passed since the accident and remembered clearly how the accident occurred, but had difficulty estimating the size and amounts of money. Harlow limited his discussion of Gage's mental status to a few hundred words, but he does make it clear that Gage had changed in some way. One of the quotes is that the equilibrium between his intellectual faculties and his animal propensities seems to have been destroyed. Again, we were in the 19th century, so people were still a little prudish. From what I read, it was just that he was cursing a lot more and was a bit more blunt. That's literally it. Now, when you ask Gage's friends and family, they didn't find him to be the same Gage when Harlow had interviewed a lot of his friends and family. Again, his intellectual faculties and animal propensities seemed gone. He cannot stick to plans and uttered, quote unquote, the grossest profanity. I really wonder what it actually was. How bad was it? The railroad construction company that employed him had, of course, refused to take him back. I feel like it's more for legal reasons than anything and less about his actual mannerisms. Gage then spent some time traveling through New England and Europe with his tamping iron in order to earn money, and supposedly even appeared in the Barnum American Museum in New York. And he also worked at a stable in New Hampshire, and he drove coaches in Chile Ciao, and eventually joined relatives in San Francisco, where he died on May 21st, 1860, at age 36, after a series of seizures, which I'm assuming and most assume is due to the injury. Most accounts of Gage's life omit all mention of Chile for the job that he had, which was driving coaches. Horses. The driver controls each of the horse's reins with a different finger, for example, so even rounding a bend takes a lot of dexterity. So kind of imagine driving a car while steering each wheel independently. That's nuts. And then moreover, the trails Gage drove usually were crowded. So again, he had to be really thoughtful about how he drove, how he turned. He had to just have a lot of thinking, a lot of brain stuff happening in order to actually do this, and he was really good at it. If he of course drove at night, sometimes of course he would have had to remember a lot of the road twists, drop-offs, watching for bandits, knowing all of these things. And he would have had to also care for the horses and collect money, not to mention he probably had to learn Spanish because he was in Chile. He lived in Chile for a while. He was definitely still really able to function well, so his brain did heal, and I think it's called limbic something. Let's check. Oh, is it called plasticity? Brain plasticity. I think it's what it's called. Plasticity. Yes. Neuroplasticity or brain plasticity. I'm gonna try to explain that. Sometimes it's your brain heals over time, but sometimes it's that parts of your brain just kind of, I feel like my hands are gonna shake if I just held it up to the camera. Yes, a chunk of your brain might not be there, but other parts of your brain are going to take over to replace the functions and to help heal with the functions. If I'm not mistaken, I'm so sorry if you're an actual neuroscientist and I'm messing this up. I'm so sorry. Moving on. His behavioral troubles that were described early on after the accident looked like they were temporary, and he pretty much recovered a lot of his mental functions, and then independent evidence also supports the idea. So outside of Harlow's point of views, there was a statement from a 19th century doctor who lived in Chile. He had said that Gage was enjoyment of good health, and he had no impairment whatsoever in his mental faculties. Knowing what we know now about like the brain, before people in like Gage's time used to think that, you know, any kind of brain injury was permanent. But as they started to study the brain more and more, they realized that like the brain can actually relearn a lot of what was lost. And so this ability to change, oh, it's called brain plasticity. I am so smart. And yeah, brain plasticity, so the ability to kind of have other parts of your brain kind of make up for whatever is lost because a part of your brain is lost. Gage's mother also told Harlow that he used to make up stories of his adventures to entertain his nephews and nieces. If we did hear anything describing him, it most likely was made up or was just kind of like mushed together from other research projects or other research studies that were done to look at the brain. So don't believe everything you hear, just like Kenny Genovese. There are a lot of different reports that depict him in different ways. So before the injury, a lot of them talk about him being hardworking, a pleasant man. Post-accident, he was aggressive and like an alcoholic and surly, and he was never able to hold down a job. But of course, as we see now, a lot of these reports were probably very false and were just used to make up a narrative about patients who have gone through brain injuries. In other stories, sometimes his new traits contradicted one another. So he was sexually uninterested, but he was also promiscuous at the same time. He was hot-tempered, but also he was emotionally like empty and void. In one tale, it says that Gage had sold his body after he died, so his skeleton, to a medical school, and then also sold those same rights to another school and another, and skipping town and pocketing the cash each time, which is not true, and we'll get into why. And in another, Gage lived for 20 years with the iron rod still impaled into his skull, which no. And some scientists, even in then, like back in those times to probably now, honestly, had actually questioned his humanity. Descartes' error, it's this, whatever this is, which is a popular book from 1994, trotted out these same kind of tropes. That woman couldn't stand to be in his presence, and he was drinking and brawling in questionable places, that he was a braggart and a liar and a sociopath. The neuroscientist then got metaphysical. He speculated that Gage's free will had been compromised and raised the possibility that his soul was diminished or that he had lost his soul. It's insane. When you look at the stories about Phineas, you get the impression that the scientists were using him as a way to have like some poetic license, which is a quote from somebody who really loves Phineas Gage and studies him a lot, and that they used Phineas Gage's story to make it more vivid, to make it fit in with what they thought about brains at the time. And even what Harlow said may not be completely accurate. Of course, it's definitely influenced by his ideals and morals at the time, and it's not specific about exactly what happened to Phineas post-accident, but it is also the only written direct evidence of Phineas Gage. Pretty sure, I think until the 2000s, or at least the 1990s, I can't remember, they didn't even have a picture of Phineas Gage. In general, for him to be tweeted around in psychology and in neuroscience the way that he was, like with Kitty's story, I definitely wish that they took the time to figure out him as a whole human and what that looked like, because I think it would not only speak to the story of neuroscience and psychology, but also I think it would just do him honor as a person and not just as a scientific experiment. I think we owe it to him, just like we owe it to Kitty, just like we owe it to that woman with Stockholm Syndrome, was the basis for Stockholm Syndrome, which I'll get into. I think we owe it to them to actually tell the whole story and their whole lives, especially if we're going to be using their likeness so much. The same goes with Miss Henrietta Lacks. When we have these scientific marvels or these medical marvels, we definitely owe it to those people whose likeness we use way too much at least tell their whole personhood, at least tell their whole story, and not just what we want to hear, what helps with moving along medical or scientific discoveries and research is something that I always think about when I do research. If you don't know, now I actually do research for people full time, and that's like really fun. In general, I always want to make sure that I center people and I'm not forgetting the person in the research that I do. I hope this story did some justice for Phineas Gage. It is 7:43. I did it, Joe. I am not going to be president of the United States, but I did finish within the hour that I set for myself. Bye!